on today's Story Beat.
Years ago, I was directing a show at the Pittsburgh Museum of Art. It was The Magnificent Cuckold by Meyerhold. We were on this beautiful construction set in one of the galleries. And up the street, Charles Ludlow, who started the Ridiculous Theater Company, was directing a show for the Carnegie Mellon. Somehow we ended up on the same arts show at the PBS station there in Pittsburgh, WQED. The host asked him what advice he would give to somebody trying to get into the business. And he gave, I think, a very wise answer. He said, well, when I got out of school, he said, I so much wanted to be a part of the business. I so much wanted to be a part of it. But there was no door for me to enter the business because nobody was hiring what I did or somebody who looked like me or something. He said, so the first thing I had to do was create the door.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Casey Childs, founded Primary Stages, a leading New York City Off-Broadway theater in 1984. Primary Stages has produced over 175 new plays, giving playwrights the opportunities to see their new works staged, including Christopher Durang, Tina Howe, John Patrick Shanley, Lee Blessing, David Ives, Donald Margulies, Theresa Rebeck, and A.R. Gurney, among many others. Casey directed many of those productions for the company, as well as helming new plays at other off-Broadway theaters. He served as the artistic program director for the New Dramatists from 1982 to 1985, where he worked with numerous leading American playwrights in their early years. Casey's the recipient of the Carnegie Mellon University Commitment to New Playwrights Award, as well as the winner of 2 Emmy Awards and many nominations for his extensive work in television. He's a past vice president of the Directors Guild of America and a past trustee of the National Association of Television Arts and Sciences. At Primary Stages, Casey launched the Einhorn School of Performing Arts, the Fordham Primary Stages MFA in Playwriting program, and the Primary Stages Off-Broadway Oral History Project, which has documented over 190 interviews with the leaders of the off-Broadway movement. Casey's taught at many universities, including Duke, Columbia, and NYU, and he's currently an associate fellow at Grace Hopper College at Yale University. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a truly great honor for me to welcome the extraordinarily multi-talented Casey Childs to StoryBeat today. Casey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Well, it is a truly great pleasure for me to have you, believe that. So let's go back in time just a little bit. You've been in theater pretty much your whole life, but at what age were you? How young were you when the stage bug first bit you? What made you turn to theater?
Very, very young. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and my parents were very involved with the artistic community of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the civic theaters, and the summer theaters, and the arts festivals and things. And so I can remember, and my mother was a school teacher, but she was also an actress. And I can remember her running lines from the time I could, my earliest memories.
Really?
So I was always around the theater and always around rehearsals and things like that.
Was it fascinating to you?
Yeah, I was bit with the bug very early on, and I think she started casting me in shows that she directed because it was easier than hiring a babysitter. So I started acting as soon as I could walk, and then did.
So they threw you on the stage as a kid?
Yes, yeah, and I loved it. They didn't have to throw me because I wanted to be there.
It was you were a natural. You just went at it.
Yes, yeah. And my brothers did too, but they didn't stick with it. They went their own ways.
So other than your mother, which is clearly an influence, and doing that at an early age, who did you then look up to? Did you have someone that you studied and went, I really want to have a career or be in the theater like someone?
Well, it was all very insular in the people I had contact with in Grand Rapids, because that was the full extent of my life then, except I had exposure to Theater Arts magazine. Those were always around the house. So I could pick those up and I could look at those and I could see pictures of plays outside of town. And we weren't really a musical theater family, but we had the original cast albums of all of the shows and we played those. And so I was aware that there was a theater outside of Grand Rapids. And we started to we would go to Chicago. We would see road companies. I think we went to New York when I was maybe the first time when I was 9 or 10 or so, and saw a few plays. And Ann Arbor was a very active theater center, although that was 2.5 hours away. But APA Phoenix with Ellis Rabb and his company were in residence in Ann Arbor and would occasionally bring shows to Grand Rapids, which I had to see. So I had a lot of exposure for being not at a major center.
Right. You actually had some real people that really knew what they were doing there in Ann Arbor way before you ever got to the big city.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So you eventually, I assume you kept doing that all the way through high school, but you eventually went off to USC, where you did some undergraduate work for a while before ultimately transferring to CMU, where you completed your undergraduate degree in theater and stayed on at CMU as a directing major to get your MFA. What do you think were the important lessons you learned from both USC and CMU? What were the major important lessons that have held you in good stead for most of your career?
Well, going back for 1 second, I had 2 summers while I was still in high school. I had 2 summers at the Cherry County Playhouse in Traverse City, Michigan, which was run by a very colorful woman named Ruth Bailey. And she did shows 1 week stock, and she put a star in the show. So while I was still in high school, I was doing plays with Vivian Vance and Buddy Epson and Pat Paulson but she'd do 12 of these every summer. And boy, was that boot camp. You just learned how to get it up. And these were not small shows. These were like Our Town and 6 days of rehearsal.
And you couldn't really afford to embarrass the stars, so it had to be decent.
No. It had to look good enough, So that was my first exposure to equity actors. So I had some model to work with when I first went to USC. When I was at USC and at Carnegie Mellon, I went, I think, against my parents' better judgment. However, they understood. I went into a BFA track as opposed to a BA track. So I was all in on the study from the very start. And we had classes in dance and music and voice and speech and acting. It was 90% of the curriculum was.
And the BFA program there is very intense.
Very intense, yep. Yeah, and the time that you weren't doing studying your acting, you were working crew, so you learned all the jobs of it. And I think that kind of discipline is the greatest thing that I got from schools. And the fact is that those programs are pitched so you are overwhelmed by the experience. You never can quite catch up. So you're constantly working. You don't really know the idea of not working on your craft and supporting somebody else who's working on their craft.
I think that's a really great way. It's a conservatory experience. Would you say that is the ideal way to train people?
I think so. I think you want to put them in and give them a lot of room to succeed and give them a lot of room to fail, and give them approach that says, oh, okay, because you're not really going to train people unless you give them something that they can't do to begin with. They've got to do something that they can't do to begin with in order to find it for themselves. And once you do that, And you don't want to put too much focus on the failure. The whole idea is, okay, they didn't quite work. Let's move on to this. Let's try this and see how you do there.
It's a baptism by fire, and you truly, if you're not able to hack it, you know that the business is not for you, because it's not that kind of business, and it weeds people out. Not that the business itself doesn't ultimately weed people out, but school actually tells people, I think, yes, this is for me. No, this is not for me at all.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing. That's one of the great things you can get from a conservatory approach.
I agree. I think that that's what really works best. Now, not all schools have that conservatory approach. Like, most schools are liberal arts programs,
Right.
and you get a much broader education than you do in a conservatory, but you also don't get that intensity of being in that program so deeply.
You might get the intensity when you're in a play for a small period of time, but it's not from the first day of the semester to the end of the semester.
So before the show, we were chatting very briefly about all the things that you've done in your career. And aside from, and we're going to get into primary stages here in a bit, but aside from starting a major off-Broadway theater in New York, you've done a ton of directing, but you also did a lot of acting prior to all that. And you've also directed for TV. How do you think of yourself in the world? How do you present yourself? How do you consider who you are? Are you a director? Are you a stage overseer? How do you think of yourself?
I think ultimately I'm a producer. I think that's probably what I do best, and that's what my main overall super objective is, has been since 1980, when I got off the bus at Port Authority in New York. I acted for a long time, I guess, from the time that I was a kid through school. Got out of school, did a very nice season at Ashland, Oregon, and they asked me back. And I thought it was so beautiful. And I thought, if I go back as an actor, this is what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life. And I wasn't sold on myself as an actor. I thought there was still stuff that I needed. I needed some distance from it, because I had gotten, I think, very tricky and mannered. So I was looking for a change when I moved to New York.
All right. So for the listeners who don't know what that means, define for them what tricky and mannered means, because I think it happens to a lot of actors.
Well, you get a bag of tricks that you know kind of works, and you sort of hang on to those and you repeat them, and it's fine. It gets you work, but it impedes your growth, and ultimately it stands in the way of a truly honest line and an honest communication with your audience.
Does it feel to you like that's less of an artist and more of a sort of a commercial actor?
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's a good way to think of it. So you were in New York. You say you got off the bus in 1980. And what did you do between 80 and 84 when you founded Primary Stages? Were you doing acting in New York?
I first came in because a gentleman who was a teacher of mine at Carnegie had said, "Do you have any interest in working in television? I think you'd make a good TV director." And he said, "If you have an interest in television, why don't you come and I can set you up to observe a few television shows here in New York and see if it works out for you." So I observed several soaps in New York, and after I had done that for about 4 months for no pay, producer of one of the shows, not this gentleman who had brought me in, called me and he said, "Look, it looks like we might have a DGA strike, a Directors Guild of America strike, and if we go on strike, would you be interested in directing?" And I said, "No, that wasn't the agreement. When I said I'd do this, I'm really not interested in doing that." And he said, "Well, then good, get out now," which was hard because I was living on no money at all, and I'd given up another season at Ashland to do this, but I was out, which was fine. But as luck would have it, I stumbled into a 5-show contract at the Jersey Shakespeare Festival, acting for them. And I went right to New Jersey and I did the 5 shows.
So what had you done as a director prior to that the person in New York thought you could direct TV?
He only knew me from my work at Carnegie Mellon. And then I had done The Two Gentlemen of Verona as my master show. And he just thought I had what it would take to be a television director.
Well,
So,
he was prescient because you
yeah.
obviously did.
But then after I finished at the New Jersey Shakespeare Festival, I went back to New York, and a gentleman from the New Dramatists, which is kind of bills themselves as America's oldest or one of America's oldest playwrights organizations, said, why don't you stop in to see me, and maybe I can give you a few gigs directing readings, just real simple readings. And so I went in and I talked to him, and he said, well, would you like to become my assistant? Because I need a stage manager for these readings right now. And I said, sure, I'll do this for a few months, I thought. And this was completely opposite from the track that I was on, because I was on a Shakespeare track, and I saw myself doing Shakespeare and Shakespeare festivals for the rest of my career as an actor and as a director. This was suddenly, I was thrown into this world of new plays where there's actually a writer who, all the writers I'd worked with were dead up to that point. And many of them were dead for 400 years or so. And suddenly I was working with people like Romulus Linney and really good writers. And that was great. And then through a very strange series of incidences, I ended up as running the artistic program at the New Dramatists after about 4 months of being there. And I did that for 3 years. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I just thought, keep your mouth shut and listen to these writers and follow them, and they'll teach you. And they did. But I was working with people who were in the infancy of their careers. They were older than I was, but I was only 26 at the time. August Wilson and Lee Blessing and John Patrick Shanley and Wendy Kesselman, and really good writers. John Peelmeyer, who had Agnes of God on Broadway at that time, and Jeff Kidley, who had Is There Life After High School on Broadway at that time. And God, I learned a lot. Was
that what then turned you on to starting Primary Stages, which focused on new writing?
Yes. Yeah, because I was seeing at that point, all of the regional theaters, all of them with very few exceptions, were doing readings and workshops of new plays, but they hadn't yet come to the point where they were producing the new play, or very rarely were they producing the new plays, with the exceptions, the obvious exceptions, like Actors Theater of Louisville and places that specialized in this, and a few other things. So I saw, well, if I'm just going to keep doing readings and workshops and stuff, I'm really part of the problem. I've got to get back to doing productions. And if you talk to most writers, I found, talking to writers, that many of them would gladly throw in a couple of their early productions, but they had to go through the full process of writing the play and going through the production of that play in order to get them onto the next play. They had to go through the whole process. And the process that I was observing for many writers at the time was that they were writing the play, then going to another theater and rewriting the play, then going to another theater and rewriting the play. It was just the same play being rewritten over and over and over again, not getting produced.
Sure.
He wanted to say, no, come on, okay, fine, let's get this out of your system. Let's move to the next work, because you're going to get better with every play you see produced. Well, and that was the point of departure for Primary Stages, was to just produce plays.
Well, you must know it takes some gumption to say, okay, I'm going to start a theater in New York.
Well, I guess so, except I had pretty good contacts at that point. Nobody has contacts that are good enough, and I assembled people that I knew from USC and I knew from Carnegie, a handful of people, extremely helpful. We did 1 year of planning before we started it. The board at the New Dramatists was as good a board on paper as you were likely to find in show business, and some of those people were helpful. And so I was starting on a pretty good footing.
In the very beginning, was the mission of Primary Stages to produce new work? Was that its mission?
Yes, new American plays by new American playwrights.
Got it.
Maybe down and dirty, get them up, get on to the next work.
And was there any intention to have those works then transfer uptown to Broadway or not?
No, never our intention. We've had shows that have transferred. We've had shows that have transferred off Broadway. It's never been our focus and never will be our focus.
So you had to know that you were not going to make tons of money doing that because
I didn't make any money doing it. I lost spectacular amounts of money, still losing it, doing it. Whatever.
That's the old phrase is you can't make a living in the theater, but you can make a killing.
Yeah, that's old Robert Anderson wrote that phrase. And Robert was a friend of mine. He was very helpful when we started Primary Stages.
How do you decide which plays to do? When you obviously would have had many choices, I would think. How do you decide what a play you want to produce is?
Well, it's difficult because it's based on many, many, many factors. You want a playwright with a voice to begin with. You want a play that says something that has merit to it. That there's quality to the writing, and that you actually feel like you are going to be helpful in the playwright's career to do this play. But you also, when you start a theater company, you are under the obligation to keep the place in business. So there has to be, for many, many years, I produced plays that I was just fine with. I loved them, but I was producing them basically for myself. And I was not, and if I wasn't producing an audience, I really couldn't call myself a producer. So I had to start finding ways to produce an audience as well as producing a new play.
And that was something that you had to train yourself to do. I assume you didn't have training as an artistic director of a theater that devoted itself to new plays. That had not been part of your training, had it?
No, but I'd seen some good models. I'd seen some interesting models along the way. From a distance, I had not worked with a theater that had just did new American plays. I was part of a theater that functioned in Pittsburgh called the Metro, and that was a very good experience. That was more of a actor-managed company. That was primarily Susan Chapek and David Ball. Seeing Jerry Turner work, seeing Ruth Bailey work with a one-week stock in Pittsburgh. And doing it, she was trying to do a new play whenever she could in that 6-day rehearsal setup. So I had some models. And then when I was at the New Dramatists, I did meet some of the artistic directors at different theaters in town. I would see the work of Doug Abel at the Vineyard, and Andre Bishop, who was at Playwrights Horizons then. Bob Moss, who started Playwrights Horizons, was working for me at that point. He retired from Playwrights Horizons and was working for me as a director. Craig Belknap, who had the direct theater. There were many people who I could sort of watch from afar.
Did you know Joe Papp back in the day?
I met him. I did not know him. No. I knew a lot of people in public theater, but I can't say that I knew.
Because obviously they did a lot of new plays too.
They did do a lot of new plays. Their producing model was different. Their producing model to do new plays was mostly based on having a big hit musical running on Broadway, which would subsidize the new play work. So he was able, when he had something like A Chorus Line or the Mystery of Edmund Drood running, he was able to use the money to subsidize newer plays.
How long were you at it before you thought to yourself, you know what, this is working and I'm actually pretty good at this. I want to keep doing this. How long did it take you to figure that out?
Well, it's still not working, and I still don't think I'm very good at it. I don't know. Somebody asked me, when did you know you succeed? When you were a success? And I said, I'm not successful. I learned early on. I think the great lessons were that I learned that the plays that I wanted to do, the plays that I wanted to produce, I was never going to make a living at. I was always going to be looking for money. So I had to develop a second career and go back to television and start directing daytime soap operas 1 day a week or 2 days a week in order to make a living for myself. Mm-hmm. And from doing that, then I was able to start paying a staff at Primary Stages and start developing a school and stuff, because I wasn't trying to make a living for myself.
You had dedicated your life to the theater in that way.
I guess so. Yeah.
I don't see any other way. I mean, if you're saying that you keep sinking your time, your experience, your wisdom, and your money into something, but it's not paying you back, that means you're dedicated to it. Really.
Yeah, you're dedicated to it, but it also becomes a point of pride, and it all becomes a point of persistence.
Sure.
To say, oh, okay, you think this is going to finish us? Well, wait a second, just look at this. You're always just trying to top yourself. And a lot of times that works.
So I'm curious, when you produce a show and you also direct a show, how do you deal with how does the producer of you deal with the director of you when the director wants something that the producer knows you can't have? How do you deal with yourself?
Well, I have rarely gone over budget when I have directed a show. In fact, I've sort of stopped directing. I mean, I haven't run the day-to-day of primary stages in many years. I've stood back and we had a very fine artistic director running the company for years named Andrew Lindsay, who very sadly passed away a few months ago. I think I oftentimes undercut myself as a director because I was cheap, and I would not. One artistic director told me that when he directed a play, he had to have a little fight with himself as to whether he was going to spend that much money on a dress or not spend that much money on a dress, because he knew that he didn't have the money to do it, and this happened. But I think I was always undercutting myself financially as a director.
But you were in charge in both ways, so you really understood where the problems were financially or physically on stage and so on. So you had to sort of, I guess, be disciplined in yourself.
Yes. Yeah, but a lot of those things you can think through early on. You can see where the traps are going to be financially. You get a pretty good sense of what everything is going to cost. Sometimes there's some surprises.
What percentage of your time while you're working at primary stages, or certainly in the early days and then along the way, what percentage of your time was devoted to finding new work?
Well, hard to answer. New work finds you.
Mm.
And the hardest time of it is just finding enough time to set aside to really give a good read to material.
Mm-hmm.
Not to just skim it on the subway, but to really give a good read to the material to see if it's really going to work or not. And so going to sit down and talk to the writers so you can really be of some help in a conversation. But I don't presume to start giving a writer notes or things until about the third or fourth conversation with them.
What happens in the preliminary conversations? What do you talk about?
The preliminary is that I want to know what their point of departure was and what the process they've been through so far is and what they think is coming out of the work. And then I got to go back and read the play again and then read the play again. It's been a period of educating myself as I went along. And around 94 or something, we had a couple big successes. We had moved all the timing off-Broadway, which was having a long run there. And I decided I really need to do even more work in terms of learning how to do this. So I went to Lloyd Richards, who was running the O'Neill Playwrights Conference at the time. And I said, can I come and work for you? Can I come and direct for you? Because I would really like to know what this O'Neill technique, this O'Neill approach really is. I kind of knew what it was, but I thought by working there, I would get to know it better. And I think I worked for Lloyd for 4 years.
Wow.
He had me doing a film script every year. Scott and I would do the film script with the first week of the festival. And then I would do 3 or 4 plays for him every summer. And I learned a lot more about how you approach a play and how you go through a development with a writer, just from observing Lloyd and observing other very good directors and other good playwrights.
What years were those?
I'm going to get the years wrong, but it's got to be 95 through the year Lloyd left.
Oh, so you took this on after you'd already been doing primary stages for more than a decade.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you must have had some epiphany of some sort that said, you know what, I need to actually take some time and learn more.
Well, yes.
So I'm curious, what is it? I asked this question of a lot of guests, but I think your answer is going to be terrific. What makes a good story good? Why are you attracted to it?
Well, element of surprise, a writer that is deeply committed to the material, and the material is very personal to them, not personal in the obvious ways. See, the best plays force the audience to write the play in their head.
Oh, wow.
like the best movies, force the viewer to write the movie as it goes along. The writer is only giving them clues along the way because every play is a Rorschach and everyone is responding to it from their personal experience. So you do not want plays that take on subjects where they're going to go right to the center of the subject. Or maybe if they do, they're going to go for a flash and that's it. You want people who have the ability to write around the subject and around the subject in a way that is engaging the audience's imagination to write it from their own experience. That's about the best I can explain it. Over time, I've been very impressed with writers who know what to leave out of the script. Not necessarily what to put in a script, but the ones who really know what to leave out of the script.
Fascinating. And you have to figure that out as like a detective when you're first reading a brand new play that you've never heard of or seen before. You have to figure that out, correct?
The audience has got to figure it out.
Well, but you have to figure it out first, don't you?
The job, yeah. Yes, but the playwright is giving you enough clues as to where you're going to go, and they're keeping it open-ended enough, so you're engaged.
You now have decided, I'm going to produce this play, whatever that play is, and you're also going to direct it. And now you've read it, you've had conversations with the playwright, you have done, I guess you could call that some form of development, and now you're going to develop it further in the form of actually staging it. What is the first thing that you as the director does? Once you're at that point and you've greenlit it, what do you start to do with the work itself?
Well, I always find it helpful to make a list of, I had a directing teacher use the word precepts, to make a list of your precepts of what are the most important things about the work that either are in the work that you're telling the story about, or that you see as a director, that there may be conceptual ideas that you have as a director. Make a list of that and study that list and see how they hang together and see how they connect, because that will give you an artistic logic to it to start working through it. And then obviously choice of designers and how you're going to approach the whole play design-wise, and your choice of actors and acting. The actors are very important. And of course, we're doing all of that work closely working with the playwright, because we want the playwrights to be happy with every step along the way. We're doing this for the playwright, and we want them to be on board with everything.
Well, that's one of the more unique things about the theater, at least in these days, is that the writer still owns his or her copyright, as opposed to in motion pictures or TV, where the copyright is almost always given up to some studio or producer. So the author then is actually part of that process of the development of the stage work.
Yes.
And do you enjoy that process when you're working with the writer? Is that good for you? Do you enjoy it?
Oh, very much. So yes, if I'm getting along with the writer and the writer is not wrestling with it all the way, but we haven't had a lot of experience with writers who are fighting it.
Do you have a technique for dealing with a writer who is fighting it? No names, you don't need to name anybody, but when someone is saying to you, no, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that, and they're giving you a hard time, what is your technique for working your way through that?
We haven't had a lot of experience with that, I'm happy to say.
Well, that's great.
We could sort of get a one-on-one with the writer. Now, where you do sometimes get in trouble is that sometimes the writer gets in a fight with their director, and you've got to go referee that, or becomes unhappy with an actor. Not so often the writer is being unhappy with the actor. Sometimes it's the director, or there's little bumps along the way that you got to kind of go in and smooth out. But basically, I go in and explain to them that I don't want to. I didn't get in this business to babysit adults. And if you have differences between yourselves, you've got to work these things out. And if it's still a problem, a week from now, somebody's got to go, and it's usually not the writer. It's never the writer, although then sometimes, regrettably, we have to replace somebody. But we've had to do very, very little of that.
What would you say are the most important things that you do as both a producer and a director when working on the development of a new story, a new play? What so that, in other words, so that it becomes producible if it's not quite perfect at the moment that you say yes. What is it that you do that's the most important work that you do with a writer?
Well, much of the work that I'm doing now, or was doing with Andrew, was going in at the last minute, going in at the dress rehearsals and seeing it and sitting through it in previews and saying, I'm missing this, I'm missing this, I'm missing that. The first time you see it with an audience, you're going to have a whole list. And it is in our system is set up so there's a long preview period. So the actors are still in preview and the writers are still writing through previews. And you can then, once you see it with an audience, you can sort of say, this needs to be looked at this season. And usually we're in agreement on that.
Well, you're saying you come in, you're the fresh eyes at that point, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
And you need that, don't you? Because people get lost in the forest for the trees, that old cliche.
Yes. And then also there are surprises along the way. I can remember Foot, and he started directing for me when he was 80 years old, I think.
This is Horton Foote?
Playwright, Horton Foot, yeah, screenwriter and film writer. And he was direct one play, and he told me like at 7:00 in the morning after he had been in front of the audience for one night. And he said, Casey, I'm really concerned about this moment because the audience is laughing there. We can't have them laughing there, not there. He said, we got to get rid of that laugh. And so we talked through and worked through that. He had a very mathematical mind. He said, well, let me call Daisy. Daisy had written the play. And he said, let's just work at how we can get this character off 3 lines earlier and that character on, and that will kill the laugh. These were great conversations.
Well, he would know certain ways to do that after having been a very successful writer forever.
Yeah, and sometimes these are things that I can see are a problem, but the writer's got to find a way to solve it themselves, or the director's got to find a way to solve it themselves. And usually we're all in agreement with that. Sometimes we're not. Sometimes we've done a lot of music. Sometimes we've done big musicals where I said, this has got to go, or it's got to go to another point, or it's got to be one half of what it is, and then we got to get back to the story here. And the writer wasn't quite able to find themselves.
How frequently are the actors contributing to those decisions?
Well, sometimes they have very good ideas.
That's what I mean.
Sometimes they come in and they have very, very good ideas. They have very good feelings. Sometimes they don't because you're taking away a choice moment of theirs and they're not seeing necessarily the whole. But for the most part, actors are very wise about how the play should work and should be.
Well, they get a sense of who that character is over the development of their rehearsal period. And so and especially we'll talk about TV in a moment, directing TV. Actors that you worked with in soaps have been doing soaps for years and years and years and know their characters far more intimately than likely you'll ever know. And so once an actor is in a show for a while, I would think that their thoughts are part of that development process toward the back end of the development of the show when you're going into production. Am I right?
Yes. Sometimes with actors, however, you can see that something has got to be cut. They're of the feeling, no, wait, you're not giving it enough time. If you just give us 5 more previews out of this, we'll start working. And oftentimes they're right. Not always, but oftentimes they are right.
Sure. Well, my imagination tells me everyone is right and not right all the time. Whether it's the director, the playwright, whoever, you're trying things and they work and they don't work. So that's part of that process. How important do you think it is? You were an actor growing up and you've acted in plenty of stuff. How important do you think it is for a director to understand the actor's point of view and how an actor works? Is that critical for a director?
I think it's very important. But then the best directors that I know, they weren't necessarily actors, although a lot of them were actors. You have to understand the process. And as Lloyd Richards used to say, the actor is really the only one that is living the process from the beginning of the play to the end of the play. They're in the shoes of that character, so they're seeing the play from that character's point of view, and you've got to respect that. And you have to know how to work inside of that. It isn't so easy as just saying, well, just chop this and then. and move on.
How important is it for a director then to be confident in what he or she is doing when they're approaching actors? Because it's a notoriously tricky situation to get in front of a group of people who are also artists and contributing. And
Yes.
how important is that sense of confidence that you must build in the actors about yourself?
Well, I'd say it's very important. Although sometimes you're just saying, can we just try this? Let's just try this. I could be completely wrong about this, but let's try it and really try it. Don't do it to show me that it won't work. Do it just to see if it works. And usually they'll listen to you, but sometimes it's frustrating that you just can't, as a director, that you just can't give the actor what they need. And if an actor does not succeed in a role, it's nobody's fault. It's the only person's fault it is the director's fault for giving them the job.
That's interesting.
It's not the actor's fault. They can't be blamed for that.
And because that's because you have cast them for that purpose.
And I cast them. They're big enough that they could. It's that responsibility on yourself.
So casting is, as I've had many conversations with many people about, casting is pretty critical to the whole.
Very, very, very. It's everything, really. After the script, it's everything.
So some people will say that what the famous Hollywood directors have, and I can't remember who, but have famously said that casting is 90% of the game. Once you've cast well, you're 90% there.
Yeah.
Same thing in the theater.
Same thing in the theater. Yeah.
And so is it trickier to cast an unknown, not an unknown actor, but you could cast a star, but cast someone in an unknown work where you don't really know what the outcome of the work is going to be? How tricky is that to find the right person for that part?
Well, you have an advantage there in that nobody associates another actor with that role.
True.
So that actor then becomes the role. They can probably say, well, what would it be if Jason Robards is in that role? Okay. So you have a great advantage there because they're creating it for the first time.
Do you spend a lot of time prepping prior to dealing with the actors? Do you spend a lot of time thinking about staging and thinking about how the stage is going to look? Well, obviously you're going to bring in designers.
Yes. Yeah, because you have to do the design, and also I do less of this now, but I used to religiously block before I went in where everybody was going to move and where people were going to be standing. Now I pretty much think that I've got to have them at certain places for certain moments, and that's fine. Let's find the blocking when we come into rehearsals.
Do you let the actors work that through somehow?
With some plays, there's a lot of actors I don't. A lot of actors I have it choreographed exactly where they're going to move, and then in the process of working through the scene, they show that my blocking is not, we're not married to it. Maybe people move at different times.
But now, and I'll run this over to your TV work, because you've done a lot of TV work as well. That's a little different, isn't it? That's a different train that you're running, because that's moving really fast down the tracks compared to the rehearsal period of a play.
Yes, when I was doing soap, I was doing 110 pages a day.
110 a day?
Pages a day, yes.
Oh my goodness.
I was doing a show, an hour-long show, which was whatever it was, 40-some minutes, plus a quarter of another show in one day. And I was pretty good at it, so these were not small shows. I always got the biggest stuff, big party scenes, explosions, cars going over cliffs, all kinds of stuff. So you had to go in there prepped to within an inch of your life in terms of what the shots were and where the moves were and what the cuts were and all of that stuff.
And how long would it take you to prep an episode like that?
Usually it took me about 8 to 10 hours of blocking the script, which I would do late at night after I came home from working at the theater all day. I would prep, and I would get up very early in the morning and I would prep. And I'd go on the theater all day long, and then one day a week I would leave and I would actually go over to usually ABC. I worked with all the networks, but ABC for the longest, and then direct the show.
And that would happen in one day? The 110 pages in a single day?
In a single day, yeah.
And how daunting is that? It must be incredibly daunting.
Well, you don't think about it, and you get to the point where you've got to enjoy the speed. You just have to enjoy it, and you hope that the actors will enjoy it, and usually they do. But it is daunting. You don't, and what's the most frustrating is if you don't necessarily have time to have a real discussion with the actor about how to do it, or what the better ways to do it, or maybe better ways to block it, or better ways to approach it. But you still have to stay loose enough so you can include the actor in the process.
And again, a lot of the actors you worked with, I'm assuming, had been around for quite some time. So you didn't have to worry too much about them not understanding their character.
No, except you had a lot of new characters coming in, and you had a lot of new actors coming in all the time. And the character was going to become whatever it became. You could understand it, and you could kind of guide them. And the other good thing about soap is that you could find, might not work completely today, but you have another shot tomorrow. And the day after that, you have another shot. So the character can get stronger and stronger as the days go on.
So in TV, you're blocking not just the actors, but also the cameras as well, yes?
Yes. Yeah. You're the director of photography as well.
And you're the director of photography.
Yes, and you're live cutting it. Usually you're live cutting it to, it's the live cut it to tape, but what do you live cut it to now? Digital, I guess.
And what happens if you're in the middle of doing that and things just go awry? Has that happened to you?
Sure.
And you just stop and start again?
You stop, you fix it, you do whatever you can to fix it. Every once in a while, not very often, when you say we got to do this later in the day or something like that, go on to something else.
Which do you prefer? Do you prefer working in TV like that, or do you prefer the stage?
I prefer the stage. I prefer the theater. I prefer the process. The most refreshing thing about television was that in the theater, you wouldn't move a comma, you wouldn't change a word without consulting the writer. In television, it's also, well, I use this term advisedly, it's also disposable, because you just boom, bang. Hey, we do it, it's done. Either it worked or it didn't work. If it didn't work, we'll try it again tomorrow. We'll see. We've got another script. We'll try something different and we'll do it better tomorrow. But it's just done. You have a scene. I've got 10 minutes to get this scene committed to sprockets, to tape. And everybody's going to use every idea they can to make it as good as they can possibly do. And then that's it. It's on the air, it's done, and you don't think about it again.
So I have no doubt that you have a pretty good memory, but I'm going to guess you don't remember everything you've directed on TV.
Oh, please. I have over 2,000 hours of television that I do. How am I going to remember all of that?
No, you can't. And no. It's done. It goes away. It happened really fast.
No.
You didn't spend months and months and months dwelling on it. You didn't spend weeks in rehearsal, so it's in and out. Because I know I've written 90 teleplays, and I don't remember 2/3 of them, even though I wrote them. So if somebody comes up to you and says, when you directed that episode of blah, 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 you don't remember what happened.
No. I mean, I can remember some of it, and I can remember the actors, but I can remember moments of performance, and I can remember special moments or special shows that we did, but I can't remember most.
I'm gonna guess that you do have the ability to remember much more of what you've done in the theater, though maybe not all of it.
Yeah, but not my memories. It's spotty there as it is with television.
Sure, of course it is. I want to speak to you for a moment about the Einhorn School of Performing Arts. Tell the listeners what that is and what it's all about.
Well, we have always taught classes at primary stages. And when I first started out, when I was leading the Dramatists, I was teaching there's a company in New York called Manhattan Class Company, who was all based on classes, run by Bernie Telsey, who's the top casting director in New York, and Bobby Lupone, who was the original Zach in a chorus line. And they hired me to teach classes. And so I thought, let's sort of have that as a model, but we taught classes on and off. But then we decided to start the Einhorn School and to formalize it a bit and start doing many more classes in writing, the writing experience, the development of plays, and also in acting and in producing. And it grew and grew, and it did extremely well. And we had, at one point, we had close to 700 students a semester taking different classes.
Wow.
And that's shrunk a little bit because everything has shrunk through the COVID, when most of it had to go on Zoom and online. But it's still going, and we're very proud of it.
Well, and you should be if you're educating that many people. That's a really great thing. And you have also been a teacher a lot yourself. And do you enjoy the process of teaching?
Very much so. It's a lot of work, though.
Oh, it's a lot of work, no doubt.
It's a lot of work. My last teaching gig was for NYU, the School of Film and Television, and it was during COVID. It was for a semester, and it was a lot of work. It was 7 hours a day, either lecturing or in studio with the students. But I love working with students. I always learn something from them, but it was just an enormous amount of prep work.
You said something very good there. You, like me, you learn at least as much from your students as they're learning from you.
Oh, sure, very much so. And you're learning through their successes, and you're learning through their failures, and how and sometimes they approach things. I think, my God, I never would have thought of that. And they say, well, maybe we shouldn't do this. I said, no, do it. Try it. See, I want to sit here and see you try to get that to work.
Mm-hmm.
And if you struggle, I want to see you struggle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get something from it. Hopefully you will too.
Well, I have no doubt that you've also worked with plenty of people, both on stage and behind the scenes, who don't have an advanced education of any kind. They just have been doing it. And do you believe in you said earlier on that you think that what you learned at CMU was very valuable and continues to be valuable. Do you think that it's critical for an actor, for a designer to have gone and gotten an advanced education, or can someone be as good as anyone else without it?
They can. I think I'm still I'm still a big believer in training. I'm still a believer that when I get a lot of resumes and I look at the resume and I see that the person went to some sort of training school or took time, I just say to myself, this is somebody who cared enough about their craft to remove themselves from the market long enough to really investigate it before they jump into it and try to learn on their feet. Now, there's plenty of good people who have learned on their feet in the moment. Particularly, and I found this out particularly in soap, because you had people, not that modeling is not work, but you had people who were coming maybe with a modeling background, with a whole different thing, and they were then having to learn craft of acting on camera, out in front of an audience for every day. And you can learn that way as well. So people come at it from a variety of different backgrounds, but for young people, I always counsel, study a bit first. Study.
Well, the same, I think, is true for writers, for both screenwriters and playwrights and novelists and so on. I think it's better if they have had some time in a school training, but there are plenty of really successful writers that don't have, they graduated high school and they became great writers. That happens too. Yeah,
I think that what it affords you as a writer to be in a good BFA or writing program or a good grad school program, it affords you the time to write and explore those themes, because everything you write after that is going to in some way be influenced by that early work. Not that you're rewriting the same play over and over and over again, but it's influenced by all of that. And you have to have the time and some gentle assistance, some gentle support to do that.
I'm a great believer in failure leading to success, and that you have to fail some in order to learn. And I think that school is a great opportunity to fail safely.
Yeah. And you're not feeling the obligation to get paid right off for the work.
And you're not risking someone else's dime on your work to have it fail in front of an audience.
Right.
You're actually learning what the process is and how you work and all those other things while it's still a safe place.
I think one of the things that is also overlooked in assessing the advantages of going to a school or going to a class of any kind, let's say you you have to work, you gotta make a living, and you're working as a waiter, but still going to a class once a week, is that you are developing a network, developing a support network. Maybe you're developing a network of people that you will come back to and you will work with at a later point, but you're out there developing an artistic network of some kind.
I think that's absolutely true, and very valuable. And I think the other thing that happens for young people in school is they just simply mature. They just grow up, and that's helpful too. And they learn what it's like to be in a social setting and to work with others and to collaborate and all those things. Those are all happens in a training ground as well. I've been having the most marvelous conversation with Casey Childs for a little more than an hour now, and we're going to wind the show down a bit. And I'm just wondering, you've clearly been doing this for a long time, and I'm wondering, in all of your experiences, do you have something that you can share with us, a story that you can share that's either weird, strange, oddball, quirky, or just plain funny?
Well, I go back to one of my first producing experiences. I was jumping from the New Dramatists, and I worked in very good places in the Dramatists, and we started primary stages. Then we had to actually produce a play. And the play we were in rehearsals for just fell apart. I was directing, and it just completely fell apart. We had a very good actor, older man who did not trust himself in the part and just couldn't see himself making it through to actually getting on stage and doing it. And I had a wonderful cast, and he was the lead. And so that fell apart. So I needed another play. And keep in mind, we still had we had a big learning curve here as producers. And we paid the money for the theater. So that money was gone. We had the set was not going to work that we had built for this other play. And I was on the telephone in our offices on 42nd Street and 9th Avenue. And I was talking to the tech director. And I said, well, we got to build another set. So where are we going to get another set? We don't have the money to do the lumber. And I'm looking across the street at a theater who is moving a play out and throwing their set in the dumpster out in front of the theater. Play, I think it was Orphans, was closing, and I said, I think I see our set. I think I see it. And this was a John Lee Davies set too, although it was in scraps. And so we went into the dumpster that night at 1 o'clock in the morning. We took all of the pieces out, and they were just shambles. They were a mess. I laid them all out on the floor of a gym. I brought a designer in, the designer who's going on to be a very fine opera designer, a real note, looked at everything and then looked at me like I was out of my mind. And he looked at me and he said, Casey, I'll help you do this, but you must never tell anyone that I had anything to do with this. And I said, fine, your secret is safe with me. And that was our first set.
Wow.
It was not one of our better sets by any means, but that was our first set. And that taught me, that and this is what Joe Papp really had. You had to be street smart. You had to be street smart to be a producer in the theater. You had to be a scavenger. You had to know how to pick up a nickel with gloves on. And so that was our first show.
Well, certainly in the theater, the old adage is you've got to be able to beg, borrow, or steal. And
yes.
If you can,
usually all three.
And all three, and not have any shame about it. Just do it. Last question for you today, Casey. You've already given us just a huge amount of advice throughout the show, but I'm wondering if you have a single solid piece of advice that you like to give to those who are starting out in the business, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to that next level.
Yes. Years ago, I was directing a show at the Pittsburgh Museum of Art. It was the magnificent cuckold by Meyerhold. We were on this beautiful construction was set in one of the galleries. And up the street, Charles Ludlow, who started the Ridiculous Theater Company, was directing a show for the Carnegie Mellon. Somehow we ended up on the same arts show at the PBS station there in Pittsburgh, WQED. The host asked him what advice he would give to somebody trying to get into the business. And he gave, I think, a very wise answer. He said, well, when I got out of school, he said, I so much wanted to be a part of the business. I so much wanted to be a part of it. But there was no door for me to enter the business because nobody was hiring what I did or somebody who looked like me or something. He said, so the first thing I had to do was create the door. And I have used this when I've taught before. Don't expect anybody to open a door for you and you're going to fit through the door. Probably isn't going to work that way. The first thing you're going to have to do is invent the door. That's the first thing, because only you do what you do, and you like what you like, and only you do it the way, and only your take is the only take. So you're going to have to show people how this works, and that seems to open up their imagination. So you don't just go into the business and become a victim of trying to find a job up against an impenetrable wall.
Well, I don't think there's anyone that could possibly know that better than you, because you created, a very important theater in New York out of thin air. So what you're saying is, I think, 100% true. Most people are not going to succeed by someone grabbing them and putting them into something. You have to go out and find your way. And frequently I get asked the question, well, how do you get an agent? How do you do this? How do you do that? Well, there is no easy answer. You have to go make it happen.
Yeah.
And you have to create that door. I think that's a really wise thing to say.
And 90% of the work that you do, 90% of the work that you do in this business that you will remember and that you will be proud of is self-initiated to begin with. So get used to that idea and that concept early on, while you're waiting for the phone to ring, while you're waiting for the agent and all of that other stuff.
Well, that makes you an artist. You are the artist, and you're in control of your own destiny. Casey, this has been just a terrific hour plus on StoryBeat, and I can't thank you enough for lending us all your wisdom and the great stories, and it's just been terrific to chat with you today.
It's been a joy. Good talking to you.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.